Hello everyone, my name's Heidi Carroll and I work with SDSU Extension. Welcome to the October Animal Care Wednesday webinar. The Animal Care Wednesday webinars are a collaboration between Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, and Missouri Extension and 4-H personnel. Today we're going to focus kind of on a general topic because it's definitely stayed in the spotlight, at least on the beef, pork, and dairy sides in the last 5 years, and on the beef side definitely highlighted in the last year as well. One little housekeeping, if you do have questions as you go, feel free to use the chat box feature of Zoom. You can type at any time and submit those, and we'll save some time at the end if you have questions on a specific quality assurance program or on anything that I cover in the presentation. At the end of the presentation, you'll see just a quick little poll with a couple of questions to provide some feedback on the Animal Care Wednesday webinars. So we do encourage you that once you see that, just go ahead and click through and provide your feedback so we can make sure we have timely and helpful topics for you in the future. So a little background on myself. My position in Extension is a multi-species position and in livestock stewardship. I also coordinate the South Dakota Beef Quality Assurance Program, so I kind of have a lot of different responsibilities across the species, but most of my time is focused working directly with producers on their quality assurance programs that they are kind of in charge to manage for their operations. So that's kind of what I wanted to cover today. I think putting it in perspective for ourselves as advisors to our producers in our respective states really is what I strive to do in my role. I think we all get a little confused with the acronyms across the quality assurance programs, and so hopefully today I can kind of help sort through some of those and just provide some quick tips in what I've learned over the last 6 years and some of the challenges I've encountered that maybe you've also encountered. So feel free, if you've got other experiences or things that you want to provide for feedback, I encourage you to do that as well at the end. So like I said, I'm just going to do a real quick layout for my presentation. Obviously, the backbone of why this topic is important, I'm going to just spend a couple of minutes on that and really emphasize what we should be communicating with our producers, because I think there's sometimes a lot of emotion that could potentially be involved with some of the expectations of the quality assurance program. I'm going to just outline the specific programs by species, highlight who's actually the person or persons who need to get certified for each of those, and like I said, wrap up with some challenges and tips that I've kind of gleaned over the last few years. So why these quality assurance certifications are so important, I think the core value of them and why each of them was created really is to ensure that we have both safe food but also have confident consumers. And I put consumers and customers because recently I had some conversations with an animal auditor as well as somebody involved in the meat industry, and they really said there are two different audiences. We have consumers and we have customers in livestock. And so when we talk about consumers, we really should help producers understand that consumers really is anybody who's purchasing our final products at a store or a restaurant level. However, our customers in livestock industries might take the form of, say, an auction barn or a regional cattle buyer. So they might be the customer purchasing the actual animal versus somebody who's actually making a consumer purchase decision of the final product. And I think we have to keep that in mind because these certification programs really are developed to meet the needs of both of these audiences. Real importance is also at the employee level. Now, employee refers to either a hired person or a family member. We have a lot of operations that's obviously just maybe a husband, wife, or a family, but we also have a lot of larger operations who have a significant amount of hired labor. So these programs put emphasis on the employee side and making sure that we have considerations to keep those individuals safe. The most well-known portions is obviously the animal well-being and health that's built into the quality assurance programs. And the foundation of these programs is built on that continuous improvement, but it's the research-based practices that are the core. And so I think producers understand that, but I think sometimes they lose sight of that when they're being told, hey, you have to do this. And sometimes with producers, they don't always understand some of these things. So at the end of the conversation, sometimes it just becomes, this is a cost of doing business nowadays. So as much as we hate to just be blunt about it, it really is that meeting these expectations in the quality assurance programs could be the difference between you being able to sell your product or not sell your product. So with that, here is some of the species programs that are out here in the US. So the Beef Quality Assurance Program is the industry program for obviously beef producers, may it be cow, calf, or feed yard. There is also the Beef Quality Assurance Transportation Program, or you'll see a BQAT as the acronym. So these are all on the beef side and are all managed by the Beef Checkoff through the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. On the dairy side, there is the FARM program, which is the Farmers Assuring Responsible Management. Now, this is managed by the National Milk Producers Federation. The one thing that I think sometimes people don't realize about the FARM program is it actually has several components to it. It has the animal care evaluation portion, which is most common and that I'm going to focus on today. It also has a environmental stewardship evaluation, as well as it has a branch in antibiotic stewardship, and it has a branch in resources for workforce development. So the FARM program is a really multifaceted program. I didn't put on here that there is a dairy animal care and quality assurance program that's still available through the Beef Checkoff and on the BQA website. It is not necessarily what you would call the standard for the dairy industry. It's still a great opportunity to run as just an employee training, so because it's an online course that way, but it's not at this time an expected certification program. On the pork side, we have Pork Quality Assurance, or the PQA, and obviously that has been around and is the well-known program here in the US. For anybody transporting hogs, there's the Transport Quality Assurance, or the TQA. So those are the two that we'll see in the swine industry. And on the sheep side, there's the Sheep Safety and Quality Assurance Program, which is provided through the American Sheep Industry Association. So those are the most common species. Which ones are actually required, and we'll say that are not voluntary anymore at this time? I've got those here boxed in the red box. And I think it's been, on the pork side, we've had that expectation over the last 5 years, and you can't sell your hogs, you can't deliver your hogs if you do not provide your certificate or your card when you're working with the packers. That's pretty common knowledge. I'd say our pork producers don't have much trouble meeting the expectations for their industry. In terms of the Beef Quality Assurance Program, BQA had just become required by the major packers come January 1st of this year, 2019. And so anybody that held a supplier number with those packers was expected to have a BQA certification. On the transportation side, the BQA transportation certificate was expected from these major packers and to be able to show and verify by January 1st of 2020, so this coming year. So there's been a lot of push to make sure our beef producers, primarily on the feed yard side and anybody delivering directly to a packing facility, to have these certifications in hand prior to those deadlines. Most of them in our area probably have got it done. Obviously, these certifications are also available online, so people still do them. But we're making progress. I think this has just been a little bit of a challenge because it is such a recent requirement by our packing industries. On the dairy side, the dairy farm program started out voluntary. The processors, the milk processors, they moved in this last version and update to essentially requiring it to be able to purchase the milk from farms. So that was implemented in I believe 15 or 16, it actually moved to be a required certification for the farm. So when we talk about these programs, it's also really important, since they've been around, some of them since the 80s or 90s, that we understand what is current. So I also put up here on the beef side that there is a Canadian equivalent to our beef quality assurance program. So anybody in our northern states, if you're working with producers maybe on that borderline and they see somebody who has this verified beef production plus, that is actually considered an equivalent to our US BQA program. There isn't version numbers associated with the beef quality assurance programs. They just continually update, and so it's more or less they just kind of notice their updates or put the year associated with them. So they're not necessarily saying it's this version. On the other hand, on the dairy farm program side, this current year of 2019, we're on 3.0. The new version of 4.0 starts in January 1st of 2020. That's why I have that 3 and 4.0 there. There's been significant changes to some of the criteria in that farm program, and I'm not going to spend time on this webinar to outline those, but I just wanted us to be aware that the 3.0 will be what producers are still working with their processors on. So if you have any dairy producers who say, hey, I've got my processor coming out to do a farm evaluation, we still are referring to them using the 3.0, and that evaluator will use the 3.0 form. On the pork side, the current version for PQA, the new version started in June of this year, and so we're on 4.0, and all those new materials are on the website. The transport quality assurance, we're currently on a 6.0, and I believe they'll be updating that version come next year or 2021. I can't quite remember the cycle on that one. And the sheep safety and quality assurance program, they also do not run on versions, as in the dairy and the pork side. They updated their manual in 2016. They also have the online program that producers can voluntarily participate in. But as I mentioned, the sheep safety and quality assurance program is not required at this time by any packers. Just wanted to take a quick moment to highlight some of our other potential livestock and minor species that also have programs out there. The poultry programs, I am not currently aware of there being, say, like an industry standard. I come across most often that the poultry industry is working on on-farm audits. You can find those specific ones there on the PACO website, which is the Professional Animal Auditor Certification Organization. There also are some non-governmental organizations that typically will have an animal welfare component to their labeling. Now, these are label claims that have third-party assessments as part of their verification process. And so there's standards for all industries of the poultry, there's standards for bison and all of the other species that would choose to participate in that specific program. Again, those are not industry-driven, those are non-governmental organizations that are looking at label claims as well as being third-party verifiers. I think sometimes we forget about our other fur-bearing animals that maybe don't go into our food chain, but they're still part of our agricultural species. And so, fun little fact, there is also a mink program in terms of on-farm audits and having US standards for mink care and husbandry as well. So now down to kind of the meat and potatoes that I think we need to for sure be aware of to help guide our producers as their advisors. So who needs each of these certifications? The BQA certification, the expectation right now is focused on feed yards. Anybody who holds a direct supplier number with any of the major packers is expected to have the BQA certificate. A lot of the times we get questions, well, what if we have shared ownership in the cattle? Then the expectation is typically that the person providing that daily care to the cattle should be the one to maintain that BQA certification. In addition to that, if you are a cow-calf operation or and you're selling some of your market animals, you might want to have that conversation with the packer or your buyer, even if you're running through an auction barn, because if there is a regional buyer sitting in the auction barn and they have the corporate policy, they cannot purchase anything that's not BQA certified, then even your market cows and bulls will be expected to have BQA certification associated with them. So do a little digging. Like I said, most of the focus is on the feed yards, but if you want everybody bidding on your cattle, the best suggestion is to always get BQA certified and implement those practices. On the BQA transportation side, the focus is on anybody delivering directly to a packing facility. So this would not at this time relate to anybody just delivering to an auction barn unless that auction barn would implement that process at their facility. So anybody that delivers direct to one of the Tyson facilities, to Cargill, to national beef plants, or even here in South Dakota, at some of our regional plants, they are looking at having BQA transportation certification. As I mentioned, that deadline is going to be January 1st of 2020 for our major packers. And so some of our other regional plants are looking at a potential date, but they have not released a public date for expecting BQA transportation. Additionally, some of the conversations I've had with just say cow kill plants, they don't have a corporate policy that's public knowledge. However, when they say, well, please encourage anybody who delivers to our plants that it's highly, highly encouraged to have BQA transportation. So again, some of those little nuances that seem to arise in our conversations when we start talking about, well, is it a requirement or is it not a requirement? As far as the dairy farm program goes, the one thing that I think people get a little bit stuck on here is the farm certification is attached to a site. It is not an individual person certification. So any dairy selling milk is expected to have dairy farm certification and undergo that farm animal care evaluation every 3 years. Again, this is going to be very processor specific. If your processor is a participant in the farm program, you will for sure be expected. If your processor or your purchaser of your milk is not specifically a participant in the farm program, you may or may not have that requirement. So again, this one is very processor specific. However, 95% of our fluid milk is part of the farm certification program, so a large portion. On the pork side, PQA is expected essentially by anybody raising, caring for, or selling hogs, even if they're show animals. So this has been, like I said, this has been a requirement. Our pork producers do a great job staying on top of this, and the pork board does a great job staying on top of this. So this applies to anybody, even if you're selling one animal to a packer. Transport quality assurance side for transporting hogs, again, anybody delivering hogs to a harvest facility. If you do not have it, you do not unload your animals. On the sheep safety and quality assurance side, as I said, it is not required at this time. However, I see there potentially becoming benefit to flocks who maybe participate in the NSIP or the National Sheep Improvement Program. Those operations might have the records already in place or the individual animal IDs already in place to already meet some of these expectations in the quality assurance program. Maybe even if there's a research herd or something, we have one here in South Dakota, because they're a research herd, they have the documents and the paperwork and the SOPs that already exist. They found benefit to say, yep, I'll just submit it as SSQA as well. So again, there's no expectation and requirement. However, I can see some benefit to those who maybe already have those detailed records. So now kind of transitioning to some of the biggest challenges and tips I think that we should probably be aware of as advisors to producers. The biggest challenge I think that we come across is a mindset, a traditional mindset of producers. I don't even think it's just generational. I've encountered this all from anywhere from the early 20s all the way up to those who are 90 plus. That traditional mindset of, I do it this way, granddad did it this way, I'm going to do it this way. So I think that it's part of our tradition in agriculture and livestock. It's not always a bad thing. It only becomes a challenge to us as advisors when we're charged and we're trying to be a resource. We're trying to provide them with their industry program of how to meet the expectations to maintain your customer base and your consumer base. And so even though this isn't necessarily a bad thing to be traditional, I think it poses a lot of challenges for us in our interactions with these individuals. I would say the biggest tip that I have here is I find that it helps to just get to know them a little bit, and I ask, hey, tell me about your operation. I want to hear where their points of pride are and kind of hear a little bit about their management styles. I want to hear how their father or their grandfather do things, and then try to find some of those common points that they're already doing that are part of the quality assurance program. I would say this traditional mindset probably arises the most on the beef side and the sheep side. Like I said, with the pork quality assurance program, they've been around enough that, and it's been an expectation enough that that mindset change has probably already happened. So my biggest tip is to take the time and ask a few of those preface questions, and then try not to overwhelm them with, here's the whole manual, here's every template you're ever going to need to know. I definitely break it down a little bit more and try to feed bite-sized pieces. And if we start with, say, hey, do you have a vet client-patient relationship? Do you have a form for that? Let's just start here. And I think sometimes that helps, and sometimes you're never going to get past the point of, I don't like this, you can't tell me how to do things, and you know what, we politely use our customer service skills in those situations, and we just leave them with the information. So I'm sure many of you have come across some of these individuals and worked through those situations. Another big challenge that we face in the livestock industries is just employee dynamics. I think employee dynamics can be anything from having operations in rural South Dakota, where you have the father, the mother, and the upcoming sons, and they're working through transitioning of management. They're working through just the basic differences that they want to improve on the farm. And sometimes those dynamics don't always mesh, or they see eye to eye. So helping each of those individuals find common ground of saying, well, yes, we want to change something, but let's match it to the quality assurance program that we need to meet to make sure the decision is going to help here. And so sometimes it's been beneficial to say, hey, you're talking about changing things, but let's make sure we have this component in the quality assurance met so you don't have to go back and change things again later. Employee dynamics can also be just personality difference. So sometimes it's people are more quiet and outgoing than others. I would say most of the challenges that are arising right now in terms of on the dairy industry is English as a second language, and the multiple backgrounds of cultures that our employees are coming from. So you can see a couple pictures here on the bottom of the slide, where here in South Dakota, we've had a lot of on-farm training programs for our dairies. And this is just two examples where I am not a fluent Spanish speaking individual. So anytime that I do a topic at a dairy, I need to have one of my colleagues interpret for me. And so helping myself understand, I need to change how I talk. I need to change my slides and give myself time to translate the slides. I also need to make sure that I'm very clear in the key takeaway points from the topic in the quality assurance program. But I think one of the biggest things that we've really realized here in South Dakota, and maybe you have found in your states, is the emphasis on the cultural differences. And so we've had speakers come in that only emphasize and highlight the cultural differences. This could be anywhere from understanding laws and regulations in the US, understanding employer expectations, understanding simple things as community involvement and what community resources are available in the area those specific employees might be located. And so that bottom right corner is actually from one of our farms that's up by Watertown, South Dakota. And they're we brought in one of the sisters who was part of the community outreach and provided specific services to some of our Latino culture or Latino communities. So again, sometimes we need to get creative and make sure that we're actually communicating the points of our program to every aspect of that farm. In addition, we can't just assume that we're going to understand everybody. And so we also have to think of, okay, you work with an operation. Here's your quality assurance manual. Here's the forms and records you need to keep. Let me know if you have any questions. Well, sometimes we need to realize that if we're working with a tribal ranch, you might have a manager, but the goals of that operation may or may not really flow well with the quality assurance program for an operation that's expected to be for an individual family or somebody truly making decisions for their own production goals. So I think sometimes it takes time on our end to ask a couple of questions and say, do you think your goals are going to pose a challenge in your record keeping? Or what are you going to need to make sure if you're going to be in an operation that has a lot of employee turnover, how do we need to help you manage some of those forms and paperwork that goes along with it? Additionally, making sure that we are clearly communicating to the dynamics that exist. Again, maybe if you don't work in the dairy or the pork side where you have a lot of immigrant workers, maybe you haven't experienced this yet. We do a lot of hands-on activities, may it be live cattle handling demonstrations, also working directly with some of those herd managers and making sure that they truly understand the components of the quality assurance program, or writing the SOPs. As you see down here, we were working on the actual milking SOP, helping the employees understand what the steps are, what's the why behind the steps, to really help get that buy-in and actual get consistent implementation of these specific protocols. I would say the biggest challenge that typically arises after attitude and personalities is probably going to be understanding, what do I need to do? What's the paperwork that needs to go with it? So typically the rule of thumb is most of the records in any of these species quality assurance programs, there's going to be a chunk of annual records. These typically are going to be treatment records of any animal for health treatment reasons. Employee training records are typically an annual document. Veterinary client-patient relationship documentation is typically on an annual basis. The other thing to understand is there might be annual review of a lot of the protocols of the operation. So there may not necessarily be a document that you have to update, but it at least acknowledging the fact that, yep, we made sure that if we did update something, that we took time to review it and change anything that needed to be changed. The other things to keep in mind is there is a lot of records that might be kept for 2 years. And so these would be typically your livestock treatment records on the beef and cattle side. 3 years, you might see your Environmental Protection Agency records. So if you're using pesticides, herbicides, or insecticides on crops, typically on the BQA side, we are expected to keep those for EPA regulations for 3 years. The other thing producers sometimes forget about is these certifications typically need to be renewed. And all of the programs are expected to be recertified at 3 years. So the nice thing is they are currently all consistent. The thing that people start to see a little bit of differences on, and I would say that gets to be the next confusing part after some of those recertification things, is there sometimes tends to be some contradictions from our industry partners in terms of, say, our packers or processors. So I mentioned a few of those deadlines in terms of January 1st of 2019 for BQA for suppliers, and the BQA transportation by January 1st of 2020. So sometimes we see that a specific packer or even just a specific buyer who's expected to work with their regional individuals to get that information collected for the company, they may change that date, make it obviously ahead of the deadline. And so then producers start to get confused, or even my colleagues who will get confused say, hey, so-and-so told me that the date was this, but what's the actual date? So I think some of the contradictions start to arise there when we see deadlines associated with getting these certification programs. One of the other challenges that has arisen on the dairy farm program side would be, as this is very processor specific, yes, the expectations of the dairy farm program is any farm should be reevaluated every 3 years. However, many of the processors, to meet their own program expectations or their own company policies, may work with their specific client farms on a more regular basis and say, hey, you're one of our larger dairies. We want to ensure that we're touching base with you on an annual basis instead of every 3 years to do an evaluation. So we start to see some differences arise there. So typically my recommendation to anybody who's working with producers or on one of these specific quality assurance programs is to make sure that you tell that producer, get connected and ask those questions to your specific buyer or processor. And the other challenge that typically arises at this time is probably navigating the websites and the logins. So here you see both of the beef websites in the top left, the pork one in the corner, and then the 2 dairy ones here on the right. So I'm going to take just a moment to highlight these websites and where we can get the resources that our producers are going to need. So here you see the pork.org website. This gets you everything that you're going to need for managing the PQA program. To actually get into the producer login, you can use the training login, but I want to take your attention down to just the bottom of the screen, which I think is a little easier to navigate. All of the certification information for producers is found right here down on the menu of certification. You can have the online training login, and if you're just trying to find the PQA Plus resources, you can go quick there. You can find where your advisor in your area is if you're trying to find an in-person training or to find the actual person to come do a site assessment. You can find all of the program materials real fast. And so part of that is going to be making sure that you have that you know where to find those. The other thing for pork producers that is also helpful is making sure that they understand that the PQA site assessment matches the common swine industry audit. So they're really able to plan for both of those. On the dairy side, nationaldairyfarm.com is where all of the resources for the dairy farm program can be found. If you're looking for all of the templates for the program, the farm resources tab is where you find those. If you're talking just on the animal care one, it has the animal care evaluation prep. Oh, they must be working on the website. That would be my luck today. So you can find there. You can also utilize that resource library. Like I said, they apparently are working on the website today. So that's where you will find all of the videos, all of the forms that are expected to be kept by a farm, and be able to navigate through those. They also have additional training resources and educational videos that are under this resource tab as well. And I mentioned that there's the worker safety human resources information that's really built into the farm program. So that's where you can find all of those. On the beef side, the BQA program, bqa.org, is where you can find all the information for the quality assurance programs associated there. BQA certification you can find for getting either the online or finding an in-person training. That's where you're going to be able to click to go into the login page. The BQA certification is divided into 3 industry segments, a cow-calf, a stock or backgrounder, and a feed yard. The most important thing we want to help our producers understand is they can pick one. It does not matter if they have segments of all of these, they only need to complete one of these to meet the expectations. And so they'll receive a national number and be able to meet those packer expectations. Same thing with the transportation certification. You'll see there's 2 course options noted here. And again, the farmer rancher emphasizes in there that people are probably going to be hauling with gooseneck trailers and stock trailers versus cattle pots and being a commercial hauler. I always recommend that if anybody is hauling directly to a packing plant, consider just doing the professional driver. And then when you need to recertify in 3 years, you can take the farmer rancher one for sobriety. You can also see that they still have the Dairy Animal Care and Quality Assurance Program on here. Again, that's not a certification that is required, but it would be a great employee training option if you would need to have that. The last one that I wanted to share was just the sheep safety one. As I mentioned, it is not a requirement at this time. You can find that at sheepusa.org for the American Sheep Industry Association. You're going to look under the producer education and information. You can find that online education option and find the SSQA button and do that within the website. I will say that you need to check your web browser and always have your Adobe Flash Player current. On my specific computer, it plays in one browser and not another browser. So this is where sometimes producers get a little bit frustrated in terms of say, hey, can't get it to work. So those are where all of the programs are currently found. And so with that, I will take any questions at this time. I don't currently see any coming in the chat box at this time. So with that, I will say thank you for your time, and this recording will be available on the website as well as our YouTube channel. I also want to do a quick save the date. We'll have our last Animal Care Wednesday webinar on December 4th at 11 o'clock Central Time. So we look forward to seeing you tune back in with us then. Thank you very much and have a great day.